Thank you all for joining. My name is Samira. I am a patient living with neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder. I was diagnosed in 2014 in Boston, where I still live. And about 2 months after I got diagnosed, I started the Samira Foundation with hopes of educating the world about NMOSD and MOGAD, building communities of support for patients and their caregivers, funding research and patient advocacy. It is my pleasure to bring back the From the Experts webinar. We took a little break for the summer, but we are now back with a bang, and our first expert as we continue the series is none other than Thomas Stewart, who will be speaking to you all about understanding your safety nets when you can no longer work or make an income due to having a chronic illness such as NMOSD and MOGAD. Tom is really interesting in the sense that he started his training and career as an attorney, and then he personally was misdiagnosed with MS, and that is what sort of inspired him to pivot and turn to medicine, where he is now a physician's assistant. So Tom is both an attorney and a PA and has a wealth of knowledge about everything he is going to share with you today. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First and foremost, I'd love to thank Horizon Therapeutics for their sponsorship of this program. It wouldn't be possible without you. Second, this session is being recorded, as all of our webinars are. It will be available for replay on TSF's YouTube and Facebook video library. So if you are unable to watch it live, you can always reference it in one of our video libraries. And third, we really encourage you to ask questions. Please don't feel shy. Tom is very knowledgeable and accessible and understands all of what we're going through. So don't feel shy. Feel empowered to ask questions. And with that, Tom, I turn it over to you. Let me make you the host. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to need to do a little technical thing here for a second. Right.
Looks good.
Okay. So thank you very much for that introduction, Samira. So what I'm going to talk about today here, as indicated on the slide, is one part of what I see as a two-part discussion related to the work-related consequences of having a progressive disease. And so I'm going to be talking about how to protect yourself in the workforce, how to protect yourself if you lose the ability to stay in the workforce, and that there are things that people who are working should know to be in a position to protect themselves later. And that's what I'm going to be focused on. So there's another aspect to this too that's at least as important, and that is what are the tools to stay in the workforce when you can do so with accommodations or with time off, such as the tools available through the Americans with Disability Act, the Reasonable Accommodations, or the Family Medical Leave Act. And I'd be willing to do another talk about those things in the future, but because that's at least as important. But for now, I'm going to be talking about how to protect yourself in the event that you might lose the ability to work in the future. And since we have such a small group, I'm perfectly fine with questions now. If there are any, I wouldn't see them, I don't think. Samira, I'd invite you to just read a question if one comes up early. I'll leave that to your discretion though. Okay, so let's get into this here. So, so first of all, what are the learning objectives? So I'm going to my goal is that by the end of the presentation, you'll better understand the following: the surprisingly high risk all people face of becoming disabled, And when I say disabled, I mean becoming unable to work. That the primary financial safety nets are friends and family, not to be forgotten. The Social Security Disability Insurance Program and private disability benefits, which are usually available to people if they're available through their employers. Hopefully by the end you'll understand whether you are protected by Social Security Disability Insurance, that you'll need to stop working entirely to apply for Social Security disability benefits, and how significant that is, because at that point when you essentially stop working, you'll be without an income, and it can take quite a while to get disability benefits, and people need to understand that that gap might be there. That SSDI benefits are often delayed, as I was saying. Of course, they can be denied entirely, but for most people, it's a matter of preparing for the sometimes very long time between when they stop working and when they begin to get a benefit check from Social Security. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Social Security defines disability, and then importantly, how you can improve your chances of being found disabled, things you can be doing now while you're able to work. I'm going to talk about the relationship between the two programs I mentioned, Social Security Disability Insurance and private disability benefits. I'm going to suggest that you learn to decline the representation offered to you by your private disability insurance company. That when Social Security Disability Insurance recipients become entitled to Medicare, understand the waiting period there. Again, that's just something that people need to anticipate. The need to get private, because of the challenges with Social Security, the need, or at least the desirability of getting private disability benefits through work, if possible. Different kinds of benefits through work that are available, such as own occupation versus any occupation. And then some of the challenges for people who decide to reduce their hours at work. And related to that, the importance of partial disability benefits when those are available through private disability plans. The potential problem of pre-existing conditions for people who have private disability insurance. And the need to apply as soon as possible for private disability benefits if you're fired or placed on an performance improvement plan for reasons that seem related to symptoms. So let's start by the surprisingly high risk of disability that most people face. I want to avoid the implication that people with NMO are necessarily going to lose the ability to work. It's increasingly clear that with good medical care, many people with NMO will maintain normal or near normal function for their entire lives. But it's sobering to know that approximately 1 in 4 of all 20-year-olds will lose the ability to work prior to retirement age, according to the Social Security Administration. And note that this statistic is not restricted to people with chronic diseases. So by the same token, I don't want to avoid the mentioning the increased risk faced by people with NMO. According to one small study I found from, I should have written it, from 2017, 79% of patients were employed at the time of their first attack, and at their last follow-up visit, over 50% of them had not worked. So note that this very distressing data is based on the study done prior to the FDA-approved therapies, and certainly data for treated people would be much more encouraging. So whatever the exact risk of disability is with modern therapies, the point is that it is a good idea for everyone to know how to protect themselves should they lose the ability to work. And my hope is that there's nothing in this talk that's discouraging or overwhelming. So before we get into discussing the main financial safety nets people have, I want to mention what may be obvious. All of the systems designed to protect you in the case of disability sometimes fail. And so I'd be remiss if I failed to mention the importance of family and friends in the way that people are protected as they go through this process, especially. But beyond that, there are two main sources of financial protection. That's Social Security disability insurance and private disability insurance, usually employer-based private disability insurance. And I'll first review the basic information about Social Security, and then I'll review basic information related to private disability benefits. So the most important disability program, I would say, by far, is Social Security disability insurance. I'm going to focus on the weaknesses or challenges of the program because you need to know about them, but I don't want to be misunderstood in that process. The protections afforded by Social Security disability insurance are critical, and people with NMO or other chronic diseases and their families should be passionate about defending the program against its detractors. SSDI can hugely mitigate the consequences of losing the ability to work by providing a modest income ranging from $1,000 per month for low earners to about $3,000 per month for higher earners. In addition, people found disabled by the Social Security Administration are entitled to medical insurance as well in the form of Medicare. And so just concretely, of course, those are the two main benefits from working as an income and often medical insurance, and Social Security is designed to replace those two benefits. So who's eligible, right? So you're eligible for Social Security disability if you've worked long enough, paid Social Security taxes, and importantly, have worked recently enough. Most people who have worked full or even part-time and paid taxes, FICA taxes, most of their adult lives will be covered through Social Security, assuming they've worked for private entities. And I'll mention a little bit more about that later. I like to say that Social Security benefits are the only thing you really get from paying taxes. In addition to a military, you literally are buying insurance to protect you in retirement and in case you become disabled prior to retirement. One way to think about disability insurance is that recipients who become disabled receive their full retirement age benefits early. So technically, people need to have earned credits, and a credit is $1,510, and you can earn up to 4 of them per year. So people need to earn credits in 20 of the last 40 quarters. That's 10 years. And that's a complicated explanation. Another less precise but easier way to understand this is by just saying that people need to have worked a total of 5 of the last 10 years, and it can be intermittent to be currently insured. And there are special rules for people who are under 31, of course, because they won't have had the same opportunity to have worked as long. If you're unsure about your work history, really the best thing to do is to call Social Security to find out if you're currently insured for purposes of disability benefits. Typically, you can request your date of last insurance, and hopefully that's in the future. That's the date that you're insured by Social Security through. If it's in the past, then that's where the problem is. And if you're thinking about applying and you have a remote date of last insurance, you should certainly talk to somebody who's an expert about it before applying. One consequence of this, excuse me, now it's really dry, of the date of last insurance is that people should apply soon after they stop working due to a disability. Your application will be weak if you wait more than 5 years, or even less in some cases, depending on someone's work history. I don't know why that happens as often as it does. That is, why do people wait? I think sometimes people think of it as welfare and they don't need welfare. And there is a welfare program for people with disabilities that I'm not talking about, and that's SSI. But this is an insurance program, and if you wait long enough because you don't need it now, you will not be able to get it later. So remember, if you stop working, especially due to your symptoms, that the clock is ticking for you to submit this application. People who have not worked in the 5 years prior to becoming disabled will not be insured by Social Security, and this is a potential trap for stay-at-home or work-in-the-home spouses. usually women. Consider a woman who plans to stay at home with her younger children and then return to work once the daughter, let's say, enters the first grade. If she becomes disabled after staying out of the workforce for 5 years, she will have lost the ability to file for Social Security disability benefits. It's possible to maintain eligibility by working part-time, as I mentioned earlier. So if you earn just about $6,000 per year, you would stay fully insured during that period of time. This is a pretty, this affects a small number of people, so I'll try not to spend too much time on it. But when people transition from Social Security paying into, let's say, working for a private employer to working for a public employer, let's say a school, especially if there's a small gap in there, there may be a period of time when you're uninsured entirely. So I'll just leave it at that, if any of the listeners experience a transition from paying into Social Security to paying into a public retirement, a state public employment retirement system, you should look into it very carefully to see if you're creating a gap in your coverage, your protection against becoming disabled, right? So substantial gainful activity is a very important concept for Social Security. If someone is working for more than what Social Security considers to be substantial gainful activity, and that's $1,350 per month, then she is not disabled no matter how severe her symptoms. And so for most people, the SGA rule means that if you're going to apply for disability benefits, you're going to have to stop working. Some modest employment is possible, but as a practical matter, for most people, it means they have to stop working. And so imagine yourself in this position. You know, you've been white knuckling it at work for the last years, and your boss has begun to notice that, you're no longer able to keep up with expectations. You want to get disability benefits, and someone tells that you have to stop working first. You know, what would you want to know? I think most people would want to know how long it would take to get a disability check and what the odds of an approval are. And so we'll go through that, but you should brace yourselves because the answers are not what most people want to hear. So Social Security has a 5-month exclusion period. So if your claim is favorably determined, your best case scenario, if everything goes like a perfectly executed shuttle launch, is to receive an income after this 5-month exclusion. So because of the way they count it, it's actually 6 months. So again, try to picture yourself in this situation. You stop working and your best case scenario is to receive a check in 6 months for people living by themselves. Most people living by themselves can't make it 6 months without an income. And you may need to prepare for that. You will need to prepare for this gap, especially if you do not have other support, family members, or private short-term or long-term disability benefits. And Social Security standards are very demanding, and many claims, 65%, are denied the first time. So it's much worse, really, than the best case scenario for a lot of people, especially people under 50, and the rules are less favorable to people under 50. The probability of having a claim denied is probably greater than 65%. You know, there's no average person. Everyone brings their particular factors into this, their particular medical facts into this, or limitations. But overall, there's certainly, I guess the point is there's a high risk that a claim might be denied, and then there'd be additional time up to a year or two to get disability benefits. And how many people can do that on their own? Very, very few. Okay, so what would be evidence of disability? Well, an NMO diagnosis, or almost any diagnosis, is not automatically disabling. It doesn't automatically qualify someone for disability without severe symptoms and limitations. That's what qualifies somebody for disability benefits: their symptoms, how severe they are, and especially their limitations. We'll cover that important point a little bit more later. So the limitations are the so what of the symptoms. So fatigue is so severe that Somebody needs to take breaks throughout the day, for example, that's a limitation. A determination of disability, whether through Social Security or through a private insurance company, as we'll talk more about later, will largely depend on the extent to which your medical record conveys your severe symptoms and limitations. As I like to say, in a sense, the truth does not matter. What matters is the medical record, which is a version of the truth. And if it's not in your medical record, the limitations, then you are at a disadvantage as you go through this process. A physician or other clinician's language stating that someone is disabled doesn't help at all, especially in Social Security cases. However, a physician's descriptions of your specific limitations is very helpful. This is your medical history, right? Again, so what are your limitations? Again, you know, need to take breaks throughout the day, or, and we'll cover more of these, but, or you can't use your, you can't ambulate more than 20 yards at a time without an assistive device. Those are limitations, and those are critical. It's important to keep regular appointments with medical providers. If you don't seek care for your condition, then Social Security may interpret that to mean that your condition does not limit you very much. And I'm not going to talk too much about this, but increasingly this is a problem. People communicate electronically with email or some other features, chat features within the electronic medical record with their clinicians, and these sometimes important notes often are not part of the medical record. So really, face-to-face office visits remains the best way to get care, at least in terms of Social Security or private disability applications. Follow up on all recommendations made by your providers. So non-compliance can sometimes be used to support a denial. So if you get referred to physical therapy or psychiatry and you can't go, well, of course, let's say for financial reasons, of course, that's fine. But I think it's a good idea to follow up and explain why you didn't go. So that's in the medical record as well. And then make sure you see the right kind of providers. So for people who have cognitive problems, and that is part of a disability claim, you should certainly get psychological testing. That's a neuropsychologist, someone with a PhD, a psychologist with additional training. For gait problems, it's a good idea to be involved with physical therapy. Of course, it is anyway, for your care. But primary care providers are truly invaluable resources, but you should be seeing a specialist for any condition that is severe enough to be disabling. And so, of course, in the case of NMO, you should be seeing a neurologist. For mental health problems, a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Bladder problems, a urologist. And then this is a specialized test for people who are thinking about applying for disability benefits, and sometimes it makes sense to have your fatigue assessed to get a functional capacities evaluation with a trained physical or occupational therapist. Make sure you tell your provider about all of your symptoms and limitations, right? So I talked about this a little, it's very important. So symptoms describe your experience of having an illness very generally. For example, fatigue is a symptom. But limitations, as I mentioned earlier, are the so what of the symptoms. So for example, needing to take a 1-hour rest or nap in the middle of the afternoon due to fatigue, or breaks throughout the day after simple activities like taking a shower, that's a limitation. Or describe any difficulty with activities of daily living, dressing, bathing, toileting, eating, or IADL's instrumental activities of daily living, such as difficulty with shopping or meal preparation. It's important that you provide that history to your clinician, so that can be included in your chart so that Social Security can understand the severity of the symptoms. Another example, as I mentioned, upper extremity coordination that interferes with typing or using a phone, not just in coordination, kind of in the air, something specific. So what? And don't neglect symptoms and limitations that may be embarrassing, such as urinary incontinence or bowel incontinence. Those can be relevant to a claim, and I've certainly seen it where people have avoided talking about these symptoms because they're embarrassing. Creating a longitudinal record is also important. So it's better that you're describing your challenges, especially work-related challenges, as early as possible. As soon as they occur, it's much more convincing for Social Security to see these challenges reflected over the course of time rather than simply on the eve of an application for disability. So again, thinking ahead, just hopefully you don't need it, but if you're beginning to have trouble at work, probably a good idea to mention that at your office visits. And then specifically, how does Social Security define disability for people with NMO? This is a very complex topic, and generally a finding of disability is based on somebody's inability to do their past work or to do other or to adjust to other work. And that's sort of the general approach, but I've included some more specific information here. There's no listing. There's no listing for NMO as there is, say, for MS and many other diseases. So for a lot of diseases, you can just look them up on Social Security's Blue Book or online, Social Security's listings, and type in neuromyelitis optica, and there's no listing. Try MS for comparison, and there's specific factors listed. I think that's an opportunity for advocacy for people. I think that would be a good thing for people with NMO to have a specific listing. But there are other disorders listed there that might be used, such as spinal cord disorders generally. So, I mean, certainly not all is lost. So the clearest case of somebody that would almost certainly be awarded disability is somebody who needs bilateral support or more. So somebody who needs a walker or a rollator, or even more convincingly, a wheelchair basically all of the time. If that's noted in the exam, I think that person's claim should be very quickly awarded by Social Security. So that's, in a sense, in the sense of how quickly the benefits come, that's the best case scenario. That's 6 months from when somebody stops working. There's another aspect to the spinal cord disorders, which is the listing again. These are the most severe cases where somebody who has a gait abnormality, maybe it's less severe than needing a walker, but has marked difficulty with thinking. So a combination of cognitive problems and mobility problems that's pretty severe will be enough. Also, as it's kind of maybe the next clearest kind of case. And then for people who are over 50, again, I said the rules favor 50-year-olds. If somebody's limited to sedentary work, standing and walking no more than 2 hours per day, and limited to unskilled work due to cognitive problems, that person should be awarded fairly quickly. But for many people, the problems are invisible. So, for example, fatigue, cognitive problems, pain, and maybe for someone under 50, very challenging case. In that situation, a lot of the times the argument's going to be that that person's not capable of working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week on a reliable and continuous basis. That's another basis for disability, but it's difficult to show. So that's why it's so important that there's, as I was saying, a longitudinal history over time of the challenges that fatigue creates for somebody, or the combination of fatigue and pain and cognitive problems, and how that limits somebody throughout the day. And as I mentioned too, there's Medicare. So not only an income for life, I mean, it just rolls over into retirement benefits. It's not, retirement isn't a separate program, but it's for most people, unless Social Security finds that the disability is ended, which is not likely for somebody with a chronic progressive disease, then it's essentially a lifetime benefit. So Medicare is another benefit that's essentially lifelong, but it doesn't start for 30 months until 30 months have passed from the date that Social Security says the disability began. And this is, clearly bad policy for somebody who's not working, right? Often that's how we get our insurance. The 30-month wait was thought by Congress to be acceptable because people had COBRA rights, but this is prohibitively expensive. People are often surprised to realize how much their insurance costs through their employer, because they're only paying one portion of it and their employer's paying another. So it can easily be $800, for example, which would be most of someone's Social Security benefit while they're waiting for Medicare. So that's not an option. And so for a lot of people during this period, Disabled people will have to find other solutions, such as getting insurance through a working spouse or through the Affordable Care Act healthcare exchanges. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about private disability benefits, which I hope I've convinced you that while Social Security disability insurance is absolutely critical for people with chronic diseases, or really everyone, there are a lot of problems accessing these benefits, especially related to the amount of time it might take to get benefits and the amount of the benefit. Short-term and long-term disability insurance policies provide benefits that are usually easier to access, begin right away, and usually provide a more substantial benefit. So people who have been diagnosed with a potentially disabling disease like NMO are probably not going to be able to buy private disability insurance on their own, at least at a reasonable price, just going through the marketplace. Fortunately, many employers offer disability insurance as part of their compensation package. I think it's not a good idea for somebody with NMO to decline these benefits. They're very valuable, as I have said. Although it happens, I see it monthly probably, or someone said, well, I didn't get that because I didn't think I would need it. And they wish they had. Sometimes you get an opportunity to purchase additional coverage, private disability insurance. Generally, where it's available, it's replaces 60% of somebody's salary. And I'll give an example on the fly here if I can. So for somebody who makes, let's say, $100,000 a year, so their private disability policy, let's say, typically would pay 60% or $60,000 per year, which comes out to $5,000 per month. It's probably tax-free. I'm not going to say that definitively. It depends on some particular facts of the case. And then compare that with what a high earner would get from Social Security, let's say $2,500. So of course, 5,000 is twice as much as that. And I'm going to take this time, I guess, to describe that Social Security is an offset to the private disability benefits. So again, keeping with that example, $100,000 earner gets $5,000 a month in private disability insurance. Then it's in their interest to apply for Social Security, but then Social Security begins to pay them $2,500 a month eventually. Then the private disability company will reduce the amount they're paying by $2,500, so that the person who's getting the benefit continues to get $5,000, but $2,500 of it comes from Social Security. Especially for higher earners, there's a very significant advantage, and you get an opportunity sometimes to go from 60 to 70% of salary. And for those who can afford it, that's probably a good idea. What about pre-existing conditions? You're working somewhere and you had NMO before you got the job, and then as you're working, you maybe have trouble and need to leave the workforce. Is that a pre-existing condition so that you will be eligible? Is that a pre-existing condition such that your claim will be denied? And the answer is usually that it depends. For people who've been with an employer for more than 12 months, the pre-existing condition usually goes away. So that's an important issue to be sure of. But most of the time, if somebody can make it for 12 months, their pre-existing condition will generally not prevent them from recovering under the policy. So I had one 50-year-old client who had a PhD in geology who was going to quit work and apply for disability benefits after 11 months on the job. I explained to her that her $80,000 per year benefit would be denied unless she waited another month. She spoke with her employers and they agreed to keep her on for another month. And that small intervention was probably worth over $1 million to her for her lifetime. Again, some of these little things to know can be hugely valuable down the road. Okay, so there are different kinds of private disability policies, own occupation policies and any occupation policies. The best policies provide benefits if you become unable to perform the essential functions of your current work, your own occupation. So for example, let's assume there's a neurosurgeon with a slight tremor, and that a neurosurgeon would not be able to do her own occupation, even if there are other jobs that she could do. So for an own occupation policy, she would be able to recover because of her small tremor. And any occupation policy requires you to be unable to perform the essential functions of other work as well. So if the neurosurgeon had any occupation policy, she would not have been protected in my example. Most policies are hybrid policies, most in the workforce. So most people have own occupation policies for a period of time, say 2 years, and then it converts to an any occupation policy after that time. So that means that even if your claim is initially awarded, you might be denied once the definition changes, which usually happens at 2 years. At that point, if that does happen, you would most likely appeal, and you would definitely be smart to get a lawyer to help with that because of the amount of money that's often involved. Most long-term disability companies require people to apply for Social Security, and I've already explained that. The reason for that is that there's an offset, but they can't require that you're found disabled because the definitions are different. Social Security's definition of disability is similar to any occupation, the very demanding standard. And so it's very possible for somebody to be found disabled for purposes of their private disability policy and then denied Social Security, and the private disability company is supposed to keep paying them in that situation. I already explained the offset. So you people who have long-term disability and then get Social Security, you don't get more money from that combination. It's the same amount of money, and so they say, well, why care? Well, there are a couple of reasons, and I'm only going to explain one. That's Medicare, which is a very important benefit, even if someone doesn't need it immediately, something that might become necessary down the road. So very important to seek. If the people receiving private long-term disability, a lot of times they'll say, oh, you have to apply for Social Security, use our people, our advocates. I would think that's a bad idea. I think it's even misleading because they say that person's free, and it's really not so different from getting your own lawyer in that sense. Partial disability benefits. Some policies provide for partial disability benefits. So if you lose the ability to work 40 hours per week, you may be able to work 30 hours per week and keep your benefits and get paid, often at the 60% I mentioned, for the 10 hours per week that you are not working, and that may be tax-free. And that is really important tool for staying in the workforce. So not all people have disability benefits, and not all people have partial disability benefits, but where that's an option, it can be hugely beneficial to keep people in the workforce and financially secure for a long time. Otherwise, it's very tricky. So I had a client with good benefits who worked for a hospital. She was struggling to keep up with her 40-hour work week. So she reduced her work week to 20 hours per week for 1 month only before needing to stop work entirely because of her disability. And when she stopped working and tried to apply for disability benefits, she was told she didn't have disability insurance anymore because she was working part-time and wasn't entitled to benefits. So it was a very big mistake for her. Hopefully we'll be able to help her with that, but that could have been avoided in a number of ways, but the best way would have been to apply for partial disability benefits, which was an option in this case. If you're, and this, I see this a lot too, where people get fired from their job because they're not keeping up with something, and it's so personal for people, and it's understandably personal. People think their employer's a jerk, maybe, and maybe that's true, but maybe also the person who's been fired should think about whether their symptoms were part of the reason for them to be fired, and that maybe they should consider applying for long-term disability insurance. At least review that with your network of people, your friends, and maybe your clinicians. I can think of a woman who did that, and then she was angry, and then she got another job. She had private disability benefits at job 1. She was fired. She got a new job, and then she was fired in another month. and she was somewhat in denial, I think, about her cognitive problems. And then she wasn't able to collect under the first policy because she got another job. And then the second job, she hadn't worked long enough to avoid the problem with the pre-existing condition. So she was unprotected. And I think that was sort of that was an unfair situation too that could have been avoided. Okay, so that's all I have, and I've gone over. This is my phone number is up here. I have free consultations available to people. I represent people for a fee, the standard Social Security fee, where that's relevant, but I'm happy to just answer questions too. And I just want to thank also the Rocky Mountain MS Center for supporting my program and allowing me to help people like this. Thanks, Myra.
Tom, that was such a great presentation. So much important information. I learned a lot too. So we do have a few questions. We'll go through them one by one. The first is, can long-term disability through work force you in a rehabilitation program and ruin your Social Security?
I don't know. So I guess the problem is, I'm not sure I understand the why it would ruin Social Security. Presumably, the rehabilitation program would result in an income, and if your income is high enough for long enough, you'll lose Social Security. No, I don't think so. I don't think they can force that. I think that's an option. I've never seen it that way, where it was forced on somebody. And Social Security's rules for people who try to return to the workforce after somebody's already gotten Social Security are pretty generous. You can earn as much as you want for 9 months without losing your benefits, and then you can earn up to substantial gainful activity without losing it thereafter. So I don't see that happening. I hope that's
How
clear.
long can someone be on disability?
Right. So I'll answer that first by reference to Social Security. And the answer is that people can receive Social Security disability insurance indefinitely. So as long as they remain disabled. And then when they turn full retirement age, then there's an accounting change, and their disability benefit is no longer considered to be a disability. Their disability benefit is no longer considered to be that. It becomes a retirement benefit. So not two programs, the disability benefits, the retirement benefit early. So the answer is you can receive Social Security, and many people do for the rest of their lives. Social Security disability insurance. And then private disability benefits, it's trickier. So a lot of them do provide insurance up to full retirement age, but they stop at retirement age usually. Some of them just say, we're going to pay you for 2 years and that's it. Some of them say, we'll pay you up until retirement age, unless the condition is due to a psychiatric factor such as depression, and then we're going to limit it to 2 years. So the particular policy in question would need to be reviewed to answer that more specifically.
Okay. Can work make you pay back the long-term disability if you decline work rehab?
That sounds a lot like the first question. I guess I'm not sure. I've never heard of anything like this. So I think I'm going to refrain from giving too specific an answer. I don't think that you can be required to go to rehab as a condition. I mean, if you can show, you might have to get medical evidence showing that participation is contraindicated or not possible because of the limitations, and you might need additional documentation from a physician to say that that's not possible. I'm sorry, I don't really have a good answer to that one because I'm unfamiliar with that situation.
It's okay. I have a question, as of now, I've not had to take advantage of any of these offerings yet, but it's good to know that they exist and how they work. But let's assume somebody who from the outside is otherwise young and able and healthy, but they have a chronic condition that prevents them from working to their full capacity, decides to get on disability insurance. Are people from that entity monitoring social media, for example? So if like somebody is on SSDI, but then they go on vacation, does that somehow, I don't know, does that somehow jeopardize their benefits?
I think, yeah, good question. So again, I'm going to separate out my answer. I've never seen Social Security search social media. So I don't think that happens. I have seen a few cases where they did hire the law enforcement to follow people where there was suspicion of fraud.
Oh gosh.
And that happened in one of my Social Security cases, who was ultimately awarded benefit. There was no fraud, but somebody thought there was fraud and called the Colorado State Police, and the person was followed, and the police officer said, I don't see any disability here, but then ultimately the judge did. So anyway, that can happen, but it's rare. I haven't seen it in years. And then for the private disability, I have certainly seen that, where they would hire people, private investigators, to follow somebody around through their day when they go shopping, and then to go through social media too and say, hey, look, there's a post of you here, on an elephant or whatever. So yeah, that can happen. And so people really should be thoughtful about that. But the way it happens most often, that this kind of sort of activities, high level or high perceived level of activities tripping people up, most often it happens in the medical record. People are eager to tell their physicians about what they're doing. And of course, anyone in healthcare is excited to have their patients do well and participate in lots of things. So, it's not unusual to say, oh, John went skiing with his family. Well, that might make it in the medical record because that's what was presented. But the truth was, John was needed a walker to get through the parking lot to get to the condo where he was staying with his family while they were skiing, right? So it's easy to get things misinterpreted when you're talking about your travels with your healthcare provider. So yeah, there's some caution that should be advised there too.
Okay, great. And then my last question, and I apologize if you answered it already, but let's say somebody needs to, take advantage of these services. And then a few years later, they're in a position where they feel like, okay, I think I can go back to work. I think I can go back full time. But unfortunately, they have another setback and then they're back to where they started. Are you able to be on it, off it, on it, off it?
Yeah, there are complex rules about that. And certainly Social Security has wisely created incentives for people to try to go back to work.
Okay.
And the good news is in MS, we're starting to see that to some extent, and hopefully, I don't know in NMO really, but hopefully that happens there too. Let me take a side note here. That to be found disabled, the disability has to have lasted or be expected to last for 12 months. So if somebody has an attack and they're quickly recover, that's not enough for disability, right? So that's not the kind of improvement you're talking about. It's like short term, right? We're talking about somebody who's been disabled for a long time, and then over time they're starting to, do well, or even maybe the economy is doing better. Now they have options that they didn't have before, and there are rules to encourage that. As I mentioned briefly, you get 9 months to make as much as you want without jeopardizing your disability benefits, and then you can continue to work under a particular threshold, which is substantial gainful activity. That's $1,350 a month, not a lot. So the 9 months gives you a lot, and then after that, you'll lose your benefit for the month that you're making more. But then if for a period of time after that, you still have your benefits if you stop earning over substantial gainful activity, and then you are no longer receiving Social Security. But then you, within a period of time, and I don't want to say because I don't want to be wrong, I think it might be 3 years, you get to request expedited approval. So when you reapply, it should, in theory, be easier that next time around. So there are a lot of, and I'd be happy to tighten up my answers and address that for another presentation. But it's an excellent question.
Great. So I think we are about to wrap up, but Tom, do you have any maybe high level takeaways that you can share with the audience? Maybe 2 or 3 things that are good for this audience to know?
Right. I'll try to repeat what I think are the some of the key ones. Right. Is, you know, get private disability insurance if possible. And sometimes that means working for a large employer instead of a small employer. And I'm not sure, there's a lot of existential questions in there, but certainly financially, people are better off if they can do that. And if you're given that opportunity through work, definitely take it, pay that money for it. And then, the second kind of another important lesson is to make sure that you're talking with your clinicians about your limitations. Again, the truth doesn't matter, the medical record does. So if you don't provide your history in sufficient detail, you might run into trouble later. And then for people who choose, like I said, the stay-at-home mom, I see that and it's heartbreaking. When someone's like, oh, okay, well, I stayed home and I did all this work with my kids, and now I was planning to go back to work, but now I can't. So my family needs me to get an income, and well, you can't now because you've been out of the workforce too long. So understanding that 5-year rule for being out of the workforce from Social Security, I think, is the final answer I will give to your question.
Great. Well, thank you once again. This was incredibly informative, and I'm sure that our community and other communities will benefit from this. And then I do see that you have your phone number here on the last slide. So is that something you want out there or no?
Yes, that's my office number. I'm sorry, I literally don't know why I clicked.
Okay, so we'll put that in the in our blurb about this webinar. But Tom, thank you so much again for making time on a Friday afternoon. This is so helpful, and yeah, we really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.